The day Hollywood legend Faye Dunaway stepped into the flashing spotlight with a visibly changed appearance, the entertainment elite were taken aback. The global public had previously admired her as one of the defining images of cinematic allure. But beneath the relentless cameras, that noticeable facial tension exposed a difficult reality of aging in the public eye. By attempting to maintain her youth in a highly scrutinized industry, did she inadvertently change how the public viewed her own career legacy? Long before the cameras ever captured a single flaw, there was a vulnerable girl quietly learning how to survive a demanding reality. Born in Florida in 1941, she grew up in a demanding environment that shaped her discipline early. Navigating a childhood with complex family dynamics, the environment often felt unstable and challenging. To protect her fragile heart from that insecurity, she developed a continuous, almost suffocating obsession with perfection. Every minor detail of her life had to be strictly controlled and executed. This extreme, punishing discipline became her emotional armor. It was a heavy burden for a child to carry, but that exact same pressure forged the strong work ethic that would eventually conquer the film industry. By the late 1960s, that intense, guarded internal energy erupted onto the silver screen. In 1967, she shattered the traditional Hollywood landscape with her groundbreaking performance in Bonnie and Clyde. She was not playing the typical helpless damsel waiting for a male savior. She was a cultural revelation. Donning her instantly iconic beret and sharp menswear, she actively redefined modern American femininity. She became a feminist icon for an entire generation of women who were fighting for societal authority. She proved to the world that a woman could be breathtakingly beautiful while simultaneously holding the power and danger in the room. Her burning ambition was an unstoppable force. Throughout the early 1970s, she established an unrivaled dominance over the global box office. In The Thomas Crown Affair, her sophisticated elegance was precise and intimidating. Stepping into the dark, complex psychological labyrinth of Chinatown, her own hidden internal wounds translated directly into pure acting talent. She possessed a rare, intellectual beauty. Her striking high cheekbones and piercing, sorrowful eyes commanded immediate submission from both her legendary co-stars and the worldwide audience. Yet, behind the glamorous scenes, that exact same early pressure drove her to push herself and every single person around her to the breaking point. She was a demanding, thorny rose, expecting an impossible standard of excellence because she was still secretly afraid of losing control. This painful, lifelong pursuit of flawless execution finally culminated in her greatest career achievement. In 1976, her fierce, unyielding, and perfectly calculated performance in Network secured her the highly coveted Academy Award for Best Actress. Standing victorious on that prestigious stage, tightly gripping the golden statue, she had reached the summit of human achievement in her field. She was the leading actress of Hollywood, universally revered for her deep dramatic talent and her striking, effortless elegance. At that exact, perfect moment, wrapped in glory, she seemed invincible against any destructive force in the universe. That peak of career success concealed a disturbing reality. In the unforgiving ecosystem of Los Angeles, a prestigious golden statue cannot stop a ticking biological clock. For many leading women in Hollywood, the mid-30s often marked the beginning of a harsher, narrower set of opportunities. The exact same industry that had just bowed to her formidable talent quietly began preparing a shift in her career trajectory. The Hollywood casting machine operates on a hypocritical double standard deeply rooted in systemic patriarchy. As male actors naturally transitioned into their 40s and 50s, the industry eagerly rewarded their visible aging. A few natural gray hairs and deepening facial lines instantly transformed leading men like Paul Newman into distinguished, highly respected, authoritative figures. Studios continued to hand them the most complex, coveted romantic scripts, routinely pairing them with vibrant actresses 20 years their junior. The corporate system celebrated male aging as a peak of artistic power and undeniable magnetism. But for a powerful female star, those exact same biological markers triggered an entirely different, cold response. When she crossed that invisible, unforgiving threshold, the high-profile leading scripts suddenly began to fade. Studio executives often decided her breathtaking intellectual beauty was no longer a viable commodity for the box office. They attempted to strip away her hard-won cinematic authority, demanding she step back into the quiet shadows. The industry expected her to silently accept marginalized secondary roles, often asking her to play the aging mother of the very male actors she used to star alongside. The psychological impact of this systematic shift is impossible to overstate. She was at the height of her intellectual and emotional capability, yet the corporate machinery coldly reduced her artistic worth to the fading elasticity of her skin. To justify this rapid discarding, the media machinery actively weaponized her greatest strength against her. The fierce, uncompromising perfectionism that had previously built her legendary career was suddenly rebranded as a toxic, unbearable liability. In Hollywood, a demanding, meticulous male star is universally praised as a dedicated, tortured genius fighting for his art. But a woman demanding that exact same level of professional excellence is often punished. The press labeled her the dreaded Dunaway. They aggressively painted her as an impossibly difficult diva, systematically damaging her reputation on set. This character assassination effectively shifted the blame onto her personality, conveniently masking the industry's blatant ageism. This constant emotional battering broke her heart. She was an ambitious, fiercely intelligent artist who suddenly found herself trapped in an unwinnable, suffocating corner. The industry she had given her entire soul to did not merely reject her natural aging. It actively sought to humiliate her for refusing to quietly disappear. The painful realization that her immense talent, her tireless dedication, and her historic cinematic achievements were seemingly powerless against a few natural wrinkles resulted in a growing desperation. She was losing her place in Hollywood, creating the conditions for a sad, heartbreaking fight for survival. That difficult fight for professional survival frequently pushes a cornered artist into making a major miscalculation. In 1981, desperate to prove her enduring cinematic power and shatter the industry's suffocating age limits, she accepted a volatile, dangerous script. She agreed to portray the notoriously abusive Hollywood legend Joan Crawford in the biographical drama Mommy Dearest. This was not a standard safe leading role. It was a massive, high-wire theatrical gamble. She poured every ounce of her fierce, meticulous perfectionism into the character, channeling an explosive, intense maternal rage. The execution was undeniably powerful, but the cultural reaction was highly damaging. The raw, intensely exaggerated theatricality of her performance completely alienated the mainstream critics. Instead of earning a second Academy Award validation, she was mocked, ultimately receiving a humiliating Golden Raspberry Award. But the bad reviews were only the initial, superficial layer of the tragedy. The true, fatal poison of this specific career choice lay in a highly destructive psychological phenomenon known as the typecasting trap. The American public completely lost the crucial ability to separate the disturbing, abusive character projected on the silver screen from the actual, living woman standing behind the heavy makeup. Audiences watched her scream while wielding a wire coat hanger, and many permanently decided that this was not acting. They convinced themselves they were watching a hidden documentary of her true personality. The media machinery, which had already heavily branded her as an impossible diva, eagerly weaponized this public confusion. They seamlessly merged the unhinged image of Joan Crawford directly into the daily, real-world identity of Faye Dunaway. She was no longer viewed as a brilliant, dedicated artist losing herself inside a deeply complex character. The industry actively locked her inside that specific, frightening persona. Casting directors who were already looking for convenient reasons to discard an aging female star suddenly possessed the perfect, universally accepted excuse. They firmly claimed they did not want to hire the unpredictable villain from Mommy Dearest. This singular cinematic project did not just fail with the critics. It fundamentally, irreversibly damaged her public character. Decades later, the heavy, suffocating shadow of the ultimate what if continues to haunt her professional legacy. What if she had simply thrown that specific cursed script directly into the trash? What if she had chosen a safe, quiet, romantic comedy instead of a loud, highly controversial biography? She has openly, heartbreakingly confessed that accepting this exact role was the biggest mistake of her entire life. She accurately recognized it as the definitive wound that permanently derailed her magnificent trajectory. A remarkably talented woman desperately trying to secure her rightful career position accidentally handed the unforgiving Hollywood decision-makers the exact excuse they needed to permanently banish her into professional isolation. The heavy weight of that professional isolation forced a deeply painful psychological retreat. Exhausted by the constant media scrutiny and the sudden silence of casting directors, she attempted to completely rewrite her reality. She executed a drastic geographical cure, uprooting her entire life from the epicenter of Los Angeles and fleeing directly across the Atlantic to London. In 1983, she married the respected British photographer Terry O'Neill. This union was not merely a romantic pursuit. It was a calculated attempt to construct a stable, protective fortress entirely outside the blast zone of Hollywood. She sought to replace the volatile adrenaline of her fading cinematic dominance with the quiet, grounding rhythm of domestic normalcy. Together, they adopted a young son, Liam, specifically hoping this significant act of maternal love would finally fill the deep void left by her stalled career. But a severe, deeply unhealed psychological fracture cannot be cured simply by changing time zones. The geographical cure is a notoriously dangerous psychological illusion. You can successfully run away from the intrusive paparazzi and the cold studio executives, but you cannot outrun the entrenched struggles quietly operating inside your own mind. The invisible ghost of her legendary Hollywood status traveled directly with her to London. She was physically attempting to play the role of a quiet, contented British wife and mother, but her internal wiring was still entirely set to the hyper-competitive frequency of a leading actress. This fundamental unresolved dissonance created a deep, silent chasm within her marriage. Terry O'Neill was a man seeking a genuine, peaceful partnership built on mutual support. However, he found himself intimately tied to a woman still desperately bleeding from the wounds inflicted by an industry that had discarded her. Their relationship became a sad study in mistimed emotional frequencies. As she struggled to reconcile her immense past glory with her sudden, enforced present anonymity, an insurmountable, freezing distance began to stretch between them. A healthy marriage requires absolute, unshielded emotional presence, but her core identity remained heavily chained to the unforgiving spotlight she claimed to be escaping. She was an ambitious artist, grieving the loss of her artistic voice, and no amount of quiet domestic affection could successfully anesthetize that specific, roaring pain. Despite their genuine initial intentions and the shared joy of raising their son, the deeply rooted psychological fractures eventually caused the entire domestic structure to collapse. The marriage ultimately, inevitably disintegrated. It was a harshly quiet, sorrowful dissolution. It exposed the sad reality that a powerful woman, breaking apart under the immense pressure of a struggling public legacy, cannot simply be glued back together by the quiet love of a good man. Her internal war was entirely her own, and she was forced to return to the unforgiving battlefield she had so desperately tried to leave behind. Returning to the unforgiving landscape of Los Angeles after a shattered marriage, she found herself isolated. The comforting illusion of a safe domestic sanctuary had collapsed, leaving her alone to face an industry that had already begun erasing her. When romantic love and familial stability vanish, a deeply wounded individual desperately clings to whatever fragments of power they have left. For a woman whose entire existence and global validation were built strictly on her physical allure, that fading beauty became her absolute last lifeline. She did not return to Hollywood as a triumphant queen. She returned as a highly vulnerable target, stepping directly into the crosshairs of intense public pressure. The American beauty industry does not merely sell cosmetic products. It actively engineers extreme psychological pressure on a global scale. By the late 1990s, a massive, highly calculated cultural shift had occurred. The global media and pharmaceutical conglomerates began systematically pathologizing the natural human aging process. Getting older was no longer treated as an inevitable biological progression. It was aggressively rebranded as a severe, shameful condition that urgently required an expensive chemical cure. This steady corporate messaging specifically targets middle-aged women, implanting the toxic narrative that developing a single facial line is a fundamental failure. For an isolated, emotionally fragile actress already grieving the loss of her career position, this aggressive societal messaging was completely paralyzing. She rapidly fell into a dark, suffocating abyss of severe appearance anxiety. Every time she looked into a mirror, she did not see the formidable artist who conquered the 1970s. She only saw the fabricated symptoms of an aging process the industry told her she desperately needed to fight. The suffocating fear of becoming entirely invisible, of being completely forgotten by the only world she ever truly knew, drove her toward a desperate, difficult solution. She did not seek out cosmetic changes out of superficial vanity or mindless narcissism. She walked into those sterile operating rooms out of pure survival instinct. She genuinely believed that if she could simply erase the visible evidence of time, she might somehow buy back her stolen relevance and silence the deafening roar of her own loneliness. Over the years, public attention increasingly focused on her changed appearance, with observers speculating about cosmetic procedures. Many suggested she was using intensive surgical facelifts to hold time in place. Reports also pointed to the repeated use of chemical injections, aiming to artificially inflate fading contours. The situation here is deeply sad. This brilliant, fiercely intelligent woman was pressured by an unforgiving system into physically altering herself, convinced that enduring these changes was the only way to remain on a cinematic screen. She was fighting a difficult battle against human biology, unaware of the physical cost waiting for her. That cosmetic battle fundamentally altered the precise instrument she relied upon for her artistic existence. When individuals face severe appearance anxiety, they frequently demand procedures that push their anatomy far beyond its natural limitations. This is often described by cosmetic observers as overcorrection. In her attempt to manage her changing appearance, public speculation suggests she underwent various cosmetic procedures. Observers felt these did not merely tighten her skin, they seemed to visibly change the fundamental architecture of her face. The medical reality of repeated surgical lifting is harsh. A surgeon slices into the skin, separates it from the underlying tissue, forcefully pulls it backward, and removes the excess. When this severe trauma is inflicted repeatedly, it heavily impacts the highly sensitive network of blood vessels and delicate facial muscles. Her once elastic, expressive skin appeared stretched to an uncomfortable, unnatural limit. Observers noted that this constant, extreme tension effectively altered the essential muscle groups required for subtle articulation, the very mechanism that allowed her to project deep sorrow, fierce intelligence, and hesitation to a global audience seemed permanently changed. She had essentially traded her legendary artistic capability for a tightly pulled, smooth mask. The physical changes reportedly did not stop at her skin. Seeking a flawless aesthetic, she turned her attention to her smile, executing what many assumed was extensive dental work. High-end clinics actively market massive veneer installations as an elegant preservation of youth. However, the visual result in her specific case was widely criticized. The porcelain veneers appeared oversized and unnaturally white. They completely failed to harmonize with the delicate, underlying bone structure of her jaw. When she finally stepped back into the public eye, the visual change was shocking. The constant, unforgiving digital crowd instantly targeted her new appearance. Anonymous critics mocked her oversized teeth, harshly comparing them to artificial chewing gum. Her cheekbones, heavily inflated by potential underlying trauma and fillers, sat unnaturally high on a tense face. The public reaction was not sympathetic. It was marked by a visceral shock. They were staring directly at the physical toll of a desperate woman. The deep irony is clear. In her difficult fight to avoid becoming obsolete, she allowed cosmetic choices to rob her of the very expressive magic that made her unforgettable in the first place. While the harsh public mockery severely damaged her external image, a far more significant, silent war was actively raging inside her own mind. The constant, heavy pressure of a damaged cinematic legacy and a highly scrutinized physical deterioration created an absolutely unbearable psychological environment. Unable to secure the prestigious, complex roles she desperately craved, and utterly exhausted by the media attacks, she sought an entirely different form of salvation. She completely bypassed the sterile surgical clinics and deliberately plunged herself directly into the absolute darkest, most difficult corners of human existence through the lens of method acting. This was not a calculated strategy to win another golden statue. It was a desperate attempt to confront her own internal demons. In 1987, she accepted the incredibly raw, unglamorous role of a severe, chronic alcoholic in the independent film Barfly. This was not a character defined by pristine makeup or elegant wardrobe. It was a woman struggling deeply, completely stripped of dignity, and drowning in severe substance issues. When she stepped onto that grimy set, she was not merely reciting a memorized script. She actively unlocked her own deeply hidden, fiercely guarded psychological vault, channeling her own deep, unhealed trauma directly into the camera lens. The resulting cinematic performance was deeply disturbing. Audiences sitting in the dark theaters were struck by a deep, chilling realization. They were absolutely not watching a highly polished Hollywood superstar playing dress-up. They were witnessing a deeply wounded, intensely vulnerable human soul, actively screaming for help. The raw, completely unvarnished pain she projected was so authentic, so intensely visceral. It transcended traditional acting. She essentially weaponized her own deeply personal despair, transforming her loneliness and desperate need for validation into an undeniable, magnetic, artistic force. This deeply painful, self-destructive approach successfully forced the rigid Hollywood establishment to temporarily look past her altered physical appearance, ultimately earning her a prestigious Golden Globe nomination. She continued this dangerous, emotionally exhausting method throughout the 1990s. She completely ignored her chronological age and the constant industry expectations, securing a coveted Emmy Award in 1994 and another Golden Globe in 1998 for her powerful performance in Gia. In these specific, deeply complex roles, she did not hide behind artificial glamour. She deliberately exposed the raw, jagged edges of her own shattered psyche. It is a deeply heartbreaking paradox. The exact same woman who willingly endured painful physical alteration to maintain an illusion of perfect control ultimately found her truest, most undeniable power by publicly surrendering to complete psychological chaos. She proved that while cosmetic changes can permanently alter a beautiful face, they are entirely incapable of silencing a truly brilliant, deeply tortured artistic spirit. While that raw, highly disturbing artistic vulnerability secured her a temporary critical resurgence, the fundamental, systemic barricades of Hollywood remained rigidly locked against her. The industry briefly applauded her courage, but they absolutely refused to hand back her crown. Refusing to be permanently silenced or relegated to the quiet margins, she initiated a desperate, highly aggressive campaign to forcefully manufacture her own career comeback. If the major studios refused to write complex leading roles for a woman her age, she decided she would simply buy the entire production and write them herself. In 1989, she took a major professional gamble, reportedly making efforts to secure the production rights to the novel Cold, Sassy Tree. This was not a passion project born from excess wealth. It was a furious, high-stakes battle for professional survival. She essentially leveraged her own capital to forcefully construct a platform where she could still dictate the narrative. It is a deeply suffocating reality when a woman who once effortlessly commanded global box offices is reduced to literally fighting for the basic right to remain visible. Yet even this immense, exhausting effort failed to fully reignite her cinematic momentum. The walls of the industry were simply too high, and the structural ageism too deeply entrenched to be dismantled by a single adaptation. As the cinematic doors continued to slam shut, her desperate search for validation and inner peace took a stark turn. In a poignant attempt to quiet the raging internal chaos, she formally converted to Roman Catholicism. She was actively seeking a pure, unconditional sanctuary entirely divorced from the toxic, judgmental glare of Los Angeles. She needed a fundamental spiritual grounding, a place where her human worth was not exclusively tied to her box office numbers or the flawless elasticity of her skin. However, the severe, unrelenting machinery of the entertainment industry was not finished inflicting its punishment. In 1994, she secured the prestigious, coveted leading role in Andrew Lloyd Webber's massive stage production of Sunset Boulevard. It was meant to be her triumphant, undeniable return to absolute cultural dominance. Instead, it became a deeply humiliating experience. Just before she was scheduled to officially take the stage, Webber abruptly and publicly fired her. He coldly stated her singing voice was simply not strong enough to carry the production. The public fallout was highly damaging. She immediately filed a $6 million lawsuit, but the financial compensation could never repair the incredibly public degradation. She was a legendary Academy Award winner, coldly discarded from a Broadway stage like an untalented amateur. This sad pattern of desperate attempts followed by harsh rejections continuously occurred. In 2005, she attempted to navigate the chaotic, cynical world of reality television as a judge on The Starlet, a project that quickly faded into irrelevance. Later, her deeply passionate, long-gestating cinematic project, Masterclass, completely collapsed before it could even be finished. She was trapped in an incredibly cruel, exhausting cycle, constantly, fiercely fighting to reclaim her top position, only to be pushed back down by an industry that had long ago decided her time was simply up. Behind the closed doors of those collapsed projects and heavily publicized firings, a much darker, completely invisible struggle was affecting her deeply from the inside out. For decades, the global media and Hollywood executives effortlessly agreed on a single, highly damaging narrative. They aggressively branded her as an impossibly arrogant, vindictive diva. Every sudden outburst on set, every seemingly irrational demand, and every burned professional bridge was coldly chalked up to monstrous celebrity ego. The world collectively hated her for her erratic behavior. But that universal judgment was built on a deeply tragic, fundamental ignorance. They were not witnessing the tantrums of a spoiled movie star. They were watching a struggling woman actively dealing with an unmanaged mental health condition. The heartbreaking truth remained completely buried until the release of the 2024 documentary film, Faye. The heavily guarded icon finally shattered the silence. She later revealed that she had spent decades living with bipolar disorder without a proper diagnosis. Those legendary, severe onset rages were not calculated acts of cruelty or diva entitlement. They were the severe outbursts of an unmanaged mental health condition. When the manic highs eventually crashed, she was plunged directly into deep emotional struggles. This left her completely unable to function or protect her own reputation. Trapped inside this distressing, constantly fluctuating mental prison and completely lacking a proper medical diagnosis, she desperately sought her own anesthetic. She plunged into a severe, highly destructive battle with difficult struggles with alcohol. This was not the glamorous, celebratory drinking of the Hollywood elite. It was a dark, frantic form of self-medication. She was simply trying to numb the deafening, erratic noise inside her own skull. The alcohol only made the situation worse, amplifying the mood swings and further alienating the very colleagues she desperately needed for her professional survival. The most deeply tragic element of this entire revelation is the sheer, unforgiving cruelty of the era she navigated. During the 1980s and 90s, the entertainment industry possessed absolutely zero vocabulary for mental health awareness. When a powerful man in Hollywood exhibited erratic behavior, he was frequently protected and excused as a tormented genius. But when she exhibited the exact same symptoms, she was severely penalized, heavily blacklisted, and labeled a selfish nightmare. She survived her most critical years locked in a silent, difficult, personal hell. She endured the daily torment of a mental health condition, while the entire world pointed their fingers and cruelly blamed her for simply being a terrible person. The deep collateral damage of those mental health struggles inevitably spilled far beyond the boundaries of Hollywood sound stages, affecting the most sacred, vulnerable space of her life. While she was desperately self-medicating with alcohol and violently swinging between manic highs and clinical exhaustion, she was simultaneously trying to raise a child. The adoption of Liam was originally intended to be her ultimate, grounding salvation. Instead, she unintentionally dragged him directly into the chaotic epicenter of her struggles. The impact of those struggles extended beyond her own life and affected her relationship with Liam during his childhood. For a young boy attempting to understand his mother, the environment was completely destabilizing. Liam grew up bearing firsthand witness to unpredictable, concerning emotional eruptions. The loving, intensely protective mother he needed could vanish in an absolute instant, suddenly replaced by a furious, unrecognizable stranger. In a brave, devastatingly honest confession, he later admitted that those severe, explosive mood swings frequently scared him. He reportedly revealed that during her darkest episodes, her behavior felt intensely overwhelming, leaving a lasting impact on his childhood. Hearing your own son speak so openly about the reality of your parenting is a level of psychological pain that is almost impossible to quantify. Yet, despite enduring that incredibly volatile, frightening childhood, his ultimate response completely defied the predictable Hollywood narrative of bitter, estranged celebrity offspring. He did not publicly condemn her or weaponize his childhood trauma for tabloid profit. Instead, he offered a deep, moving testament to the incredible resilience of genuine human connection. He openly acknowledged the reality of her illness, but he forcefully emphasized the immense, undeniable love that always existed beneath the mental health struggles. He recognized that she was not a monster intentionally inflicting pain. She was a struggling woman desperately fighting to survive while actively trying to be a good mother. This unconditional, fiercely protective love from her son became her absolute greatest, most significant victory. During a deeply rare, unscripted public moment, she completely broke down in tears while discussing the immense privilege of raising him. That specific, raw, emotional display stripped away decades of hardened diva armor. It revealed the painful, completely silent guilt of a mother who knew her illness had caused her child pain, desperately intertwined with the overwhelming biological instinct to love and protect him. In the end, it was not the golden statues, the millions of dollars, or the surgical procedures that offered her true redemption. It was the simple, undeniable grace of a son looking past the difficult aftermath of her mental health struggles and choosing to love the deeply fractured, desperately trying woman underneath. While she eventually found acceptance within the private walls of her family, the modern public arena was quietly preparing one final, harsh moment. In 2017, the Academy Awards invited her back to the exact same prestigious stage where she had claimed her absolute, undeniable cinematic crown 4 decades earlier. It was supposed to be a beautiful, nostalgic celebration of a Hollywood legend. Instead, it instantly devolved into the most painful, globally televised nightmare of her entire life. Standing before a live audience of millions, she was handed the final, highly anticipated envelope for Best Picture. The backstage crew had committed a catastrophic, unprecedented logistical error, physically handing her the wrong card. When her co-presenter hesitated in deep confusion, he silently passed the card to her. Trusting the system, she proudly read the printed words out loud, officially announcing La La Land as the winner. Moments later, complete chaos erupted on stage as the producers frantically rushed out to correct the massive mistake. The modern digital reaction was completely harsh and utterly devoid of human empathy. We live in an incredibly toxic era of viral meme culture, where the global internet actively feeds on public humiliation. Millions of anonymous users instantly transformed the genuine, visible panic of a veteran actress into a cheap, disposable digital joke. The internet mob viciously mocked her confusion, completely ignoring the absolute fact that she was an innocent victim of a backstage accounting failure. Despite bearing zero actual responsibility for the massive blunder, she internalized a devastating amount of shame, later heartbreakingly confessing that it was the absolute worst moment she had ever experienced. The exact stage that once cemented her legendary legacy had been weaponized to completely humiliate her in front of the entire world. This incredibly public trauma was immediately followed by the final, damaging blow from the theatrical establishment. In 2019, Desperately trying to maintain her artistic dignity and keep working, she signed on to star in the Broadway-bound play, Tea at 5. The production was abruptly canceled, and she was publicly, humiliatingly fired. Severe allegations leaked to the press, claiming she had verbally lashed out at crew members, which rapidly culminated in a highly publicized lawsuit filed by her own assistant. The unforgiving system had officially, permanently, dropped the Iron Gate. A magnificent, fiercely talented woman who had literally shaped the visual and emotional landscape of 1970s cinema was entirely reduced to tabloid fodder. Hollywood had completely lost its patience. The industry extracted her youth, penalized her natural aging, entirely misunderstood her severe mental health condition, and finally discarded her as a troublesome liability. It is a chilling tragedy that a cultural monument of her magnitude was forced to exit the stage, not to a roaring, respectful standing ovation, but amidst a storm of cruel internet memes and cold corporate termination papers. That public setback from the theatrical stage could have easily served as the final bitter chapter of a tragically shattered career. For a long time, the public narrative remained entirely focused on her perceived professional failures and the visible consequences of her cosmetic choices. But in American culture, there is an almost sacred respect reserved for the redemption arc. True redemption does not require a flawless comeback. It requires an individual to stand completely unprotected in the glaring light of truth and actively reclaim their own personal relief. In 2024, the highly anticipated documentary film Faye offered that exact major opportunity. It was an unprecedented cinematic intervention. Rather than hiding behind carefully crafted PR statements or retreating further into the comfortable shadows of retirement, she boldly stepped directly in front of the camera to fundamentally rewrite history. She systematically dismantled the vicious mythology that had terrorized her for decades. She fearlessly addressed the profound darkness of her unmanaged mental health condition, the deep desperation that fueled her relentless cosmetic procedures, and the heavy, lingering guilt surrounding her professional missteps. This incredibly brave, completely unvarnished self-examination was a significant act of psychological release. She effectively stripped the tabloid media of their toxic power by completely owning every single facet of her own incredibly complex, flawed humanity. Today, having crossed the threshold into her 80s, the superficial, exhausting war against natural biology has officially ended. The deeply ingrained, desperate obsession with maintaining an artificial standard of flawless youth has been entirely surrendered. Her physical appearance visibly bears the deep, undeniable marks of a long, fiercely complicated existence. But there is a remarkably powerful, undeniable serenity radiating from her that no surgical procedure could ever artificially manufacture. She is no longer fighting a difficult fight against the unforgiving mirror or the harsh judgment of Hollywood casting directors. Despite being marginalized by the mainstream studio system and relegated entirely to small, independent character roles, her fundamental connection to the craft remains absolutely unbroken. When questioned about her continued presence in the industry, she offered a deeply simple, heartbreakingly beautiful declaration. She stated, "I just want to keep working. That is where I feel happiest." That single sentence entirely redefines her legacy. It proves that despite enduring decades of extreme psychological trauma, painful physical alteration, and harsh public humiliation, the industry could never successfully extinguish her fierce, fundamental love for the art of acting. The cinema, the very machine that coldly broke her down and discarded her, ultimately remains the place she feels most at home. It is a fitting conclusion. She stands today not as a tragic victim of Hollywood's cruelty, but as a working actress, proving that true artistic passion can outlive even the most devastating personal destruction. When you desperately attempt to artificially maintain your youth, you frequently freeze your entire artistic legacy along with it. The pursuit of artificial youth always comes with a heavy price, and for some, the damage is permanent. What are your thoughts on this tragic transformation? Tell us in the comments below. If you want to see the reality of the entertainment industry, hit the like button and subscribe to The Beauty Curse. We will see you in the next video.